moment, the doctor said, "Oh, I'll just listen to your heart." And she promptly said to me, "Oh, you've got a very distinctive heart murmur, this isn't right." The first couple of months were pretty miserable. I was just about to speak to him and he started laughing and he said, "I wouldn't have recognised you." Rationed, as is everything in health. If you want to make a real difference, you have to find like-minded souls in other parties. There's a very persuasive argument for TAVI procedures because they are essentially more likely to have favourable outcomes for the patient.
Hello, I'm Michael George, and this is the Pioneering Patient Podcast, and we're in collaboration with Heart Valve Voice, the UK's dedicated heart valve charity. Today, our guest is someone with extensive real-life patient experience and great knowledge of working in politics and influencing policymakers. I'm going to ask him today about his own experience, torturous experience, with heart valve surgery when he thought he may never be the same again. I'll also talk about how that motivated him to work together with Heart Valve Voice. I'll look also at the great success they had in gaining extra access to a procedure called TAVI for patients across the UK. So welcome, Steve McCabe. Welcome to the Pioneering Patient Podcast. And so were an MP until last year for 27 years. And 2 days ago, you elevated to the House of Lords. You are Lord McCabe of Selly Oak in Birmingham and Broadfield in Renfrewshire, I think it is. And those are two areas of the country that are very important to you.
Yes, indeed. Well, Selly Oak was my parliamentary constituency for about 15 years. So it's a very special place in my heart. And Broadfield is the area I grew up in as a child in Scotland.
And so how, as a proud Scot, did you end up representing a constituency in Birmingham then?
Yes, it's quite a good story, actually. I originally came to work in Wolverhampton for what I thought would be 12 months. And it didn't quite pan out like that. And I did move away for a while, but I missed the Midlands. And I moved back to Birmingham and settled here. And despite the accent, by the time I stood for Parliament, I was a local councillor, and I think I was regarded as the local guy at the time.
So now you've retired and you're in the House of Lords. You had a bit of a rest. So what is life going to be like now for you in the House of Lords? Is there going to be time for you also to relax and look at other things, or is it going to be full-time politics again, do you think?
No, I think the Lords, it's largely a revising chamber. It operates at a slightly different pace, but it does mean a lot of the issues and political interests I have, I will continue to pursue, and I hope it will give me an opportunity to, lend my support to various charities and other organisations that I've had quite a good association with over the years.
Yeah, such as Heart Valve Voice, of course. And look at your time as an MP. We won't look at your political career. That's another podcast, I'm sure, in itself. I'm going to take you to 2011 when you were going for your annual checkup in the House, the Parliament, and you went there and you came away almost regretting what happened, or almost regretting going there, I think. What happened? What diagnosis were you given?
Yes, well, the health checks were a requirement of the actuaries because of the parliamentary pension, and so they insisted that MPs should have an annual health check, and it was quite extensive, and I went and I felt I was getting a clean bill of health, and I was feeling very good about myself until at the very last moment the doctor said, "Oh, I'll just listen to your heart." And she promptly said to me, "Oh, you've got a very distinctive heart murmur, this isn't right." I kind of looked at her. "No, I haven't." And she said, no, look, I strongly advise you. And she asked if I'd experienced any symptoms, and she told me to go and see my own GP as soon as possible. And I remember it was quite a pleasant afternoon. I think it was around September time. And I was strolling up the road thinking, what's she talking about? There's nothing wrong with me. And that instant moment of almost denial was what swept through me. Although a few hours later, I think I calmed down and thought, hey, I better do something about this. This is ridiculous. So I did phone my own GP and arrange to see him. And he listened to my heart and he said, well, she's absolutely right. We're going to have to get this checked out.
And so the symptoms for mitral valve regurgitation, which is what you had, can be breathlessness, palpitations, swellings. Did you, at the time you felt you didn't have any symptoms, but...
I wasn't aware of any of them. I mean, I think I've said to people before, I sometimes felt a bit tired, but I put that down to just the fact I was working quite hard. And I may have felt a bit breathless on occasions, but I put that down to not being fit enough. And I wasn't really conscious that I had any symptoms. After the diagnosis, I began to wonder if I had symptoms and hadn't recognised them. And some of my friends and family suggested that they suspected that as well. But I certainly wasn't aware of any, obvious alarming symptoms.
So you went to the Queen Elizabeth in Birmingham, met the cardiologists, cardiac surgeons there, and what did they tell you were your options at that stage?
Well, the cardiologist was very good. They ran a battery of tests. He took me through it on his little computer projection. He was very clear about what the problem was, so I did understand it, and I was very grateful to that. But the options weren't very great. He said I could either go on medication to try and control it, which he said would be effective for a while, but with diminishing returns, and the likelihood is that there was a risk that I could have a heart attack, and I wouldn't necessarily get any better. In fact, it might become more difficult to do my job. The alternate was to have open heart surgery with all the attendant risks of that.
Yeah. And so, looking back, how well prepared do you think you were for the impact of open heart surgery on you?
Well, if I'm honest, I probably wasn't that well prepared. I mean, I read up a little bit about it. Both the surgeon who performed the procedure and the cardiologist were very good, and they did talk me through it. And I would say I was given a fair amount of information. How much of it I actually took on board, I'm not entirely sure. And I was able to kind of mentally prepare myself for the fact I was going to have a very serious operation. So in the kind of months, and I had a little bit of time to prepare for it. So in the months leading up to it, I mean, I took pretty good care of myself. But I don't think I was really at all prepared for the extent of the surgery and the kind of post-surgical process in terms of recovery.
So tell me how your first recollection of coming round after that surgery, what was that like?
Well, I was lying on my back in an IT unit, and I was presumably pumped full of I don't know what, and I had tubes coming out of me. And I remember managing to kind of open my eyes, and I could see a nurse kind of moving back and forward, but it was all a bit blurry, and she was very white. And I thought, well, either I'm in a hospital and that's a nurse and I've survived, or the other things happened. And I remember I just felt I was very dry in the mouth, and I tried to move and I realised I couldn't. And I think I just went in and out of consciousness for, well, it must have been quite a lengthy period. And then sometime later that evening, my partner came to visit, and I remember a very kind of hazy conversation, but again, I think I was dropping in and out of consciousness.
Yeah, and so you had, it's quite a tough process for you, because it was a long procedure. I think you're 3 days on intensive care. 2 weeks on the ward as well. So it's a lot. So what was it like when you got home and that recovery? It was pretty tough, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was very glad to be out of hospital because I had kind of convinced myself that, you know, that was the first obvious step to recovery. And they have, I think it's sort of a bit of a general rule in hospitals, until you can walk up a small flight of stairs, they won't let you out. So I put a great deal of effort into making sure I could do this. But actually, when I got home, I discovered I was really kind of pretty weak. And I don't know if it was then that it really started to hit me, because physically I felt very weak. And kind of psychologically, I felt worse when I got home. And my recollection is just spending weeks like as a kind of invalid, sitting in an armchair, being waited on, being helped to the toilet. And then I got a little infection in the wound. And so, you know, they gave me some antibiotics and it was dressed and it was fine, but that felt like a terrible setback. And so I'd say the first few weeks, maybe even a couple of months, were pretty bleak, and I just kind of sat there feeling quite sorry for myself.
And then you decided to go to rehabilitation, you went to physio, and how did that help with your recovery?
Yeah, that was a really good period. I mean, it's quite difficult at first because, again, you know, it was certainly partly psychological, but because I hadn't been doing anything. I mean, I was, you know, weaker. I didn't really feel I had much strength at all. I remember just trying to get up the stairs and going into the room where they held the event and thinking, I'll never make this. But that was the best thing I could have done, I think, because being with a group of other people was, as is often the case in these situations, I think it was very motivating, and people were at different stages. So, I mean, I could see that people were making progress. And once they were giving me some kind of structured exercises to do at home as well, I kind of trusted that I was capable of doing those. And so that set in train a whole kind of process of getting stronger and recovering. And as is often the case, as I got better physically, I got better mentally as well.
And how long would you say you were back at work? I think after 6 months. How long before you felt, right, I'm really back to where I was? Because at one point you were saying you thought you may never be the same, but you got there.
Yeah, well, as I say, the first couple of months were pretty miserable. It did start to improve. I was able to do some work from home and you know, gradually get back to things, but I was physically not in great shape. I mean, I think I started going back to work just after Christmas, I think it was, or just before Christmas, and I started going down 1 day a week to London, and that was quite an effort to make I mean, that was a journey I'd been doing for years. It's quite an effort to make the journey up and down, but and I think it was probably, I think I had the operation in the May, about the end of May. It was the new year before I really started to feel, started to feel I was back, and it was probably a little while after that I started to feel kind of back to normal.
And so through all these processes, we often hear patients say they needed someone to support them at home. And I know at this point your children were still quite young. So what was it like, and what was it like for the children? What was it like getting that support?
Well, I was very grateful for it. I think I'm quite an independent-minded person, so in a funny way, I was grateful for it and I needed it, but I didn't really like it either. But my partner at the time, we're not together anymore, my partner at the time was very supportive, and she looked after me and helped me along. And my children were were teenagers at the time, but and they did their level best to be very helpful, but I think they were actually pretty worried because I don't think they weren't used to seeing me ill. I don't think they'd ever really seen me be ill before, and so I think they were quite frightened by it to some extent.
And I think you tell the story about you went for the physio, for the recuperation, and then you met that same person later and they hardly recognised you.
Yeah, that's a lovely story. The chap who ran the sessions, I bumped into him at some event quite a while afterwards, after I was well back to work, and I was just about to speak to him and he started laughing and he said, "I wouldn't have recognised you." I said, "What do you mean?" And he told me the story about the state I appeared in, both physically, and he could tell by all my facial expressions the first time he'd ever seen me, the first session that I had turned up for. And he was actually saying it was a classic. I was a classic example of what people are like if they're able to complete a program like that, and they get their confidence and their physical strength back. But yes, we had quite a good laugh about it because it was one extreme to the other, I guess.
Exactly, and that's important. We talk about the recovery, which is difficult, but you got back to full health, which is important. Now, as anyone going through surgery, it's a difficult process, but as a politician and you're in the public domain, it must be hard for you because you need to be seen to be strong. And how open could you be about it? Was it more difficult for you because you're such a public personality?
Yes, I think it was a bit difficult, and obviously I couldn't keep it a complete secret because I was off work and I wasn't appearing in public. But I think I tried to kind of, with some help from friends and colleagues, I tried to kind of manage the news a bit, and people were very nice on the whole. People did ask after me. I guess I tried to play it down a bit, but I think it was the help and support of colleagues that allowed me to manage the period when I quite clearly wasn't fit to do my job, and that, as I say, that kind of lengthy period before I got back to full fitness, where I was able to do some things, but I couldn't do a great deal in the public domain, which is kind of funny for what's such a public role. So yeah, I find it a bit difficult to manage. Although I do have to say, maybe the good side of that was that as I did move towards a full recovery, it did encourage me to talk much more openly about it, which I think was possibly quite good for other people. So it did have a kind of spin-off, and maybe the whole kind of learning process for me of not wanting to talk about it and clamming up. But I realised afterwards that, well, that's what happens to lots of people. Exactly. And maybe it was quite a good thing that I was able to be a bit more public later.
Yeah. And you started being public about it with Heartfelt Voice came when you were invited to walk across Westminster Bridge and see a procedure at St Thomas's Hospital, procedure called TAVI, transcatheter aortic valve implantation. Tell me more about that experience and how it changed your outlook.
Well, it was one of those kind of absolutely amazing episodes. The procedure took place in a fairly small room, probably not, in fact, maybe smaller than the one we're in at the moment. There was about, I think there was about 2, possibly 3 of us observing. There was, I think, 1 nurse and a couple of medical staff, and the surgeon was working a wheel and looking at it through a screen, and we were behind him, and they were operating on an 85-year-old gentleman, and the whole procedure took under an hour, which they said was rather long, and they put it down to the fact that the gentleman was quite elderly, and they had a bit of trouble getting access via his groin. but he was semi-conscious throughout. He was talking to people, and I kind of stood and watched this, and I reflected on waking up with all the tubes sticking out of me. And I was told afterwards that 3 weeks later, this gentleman was back working on his allotment versus, as I say, about 6 months or something in my case.
So it had a big impact upon you, and then you started working with Heart Valve Voice. And tell me more, you created, I think it's probably the world's first All Party Parliamentary Group on heart valve disease. So tell me more about that how that came together and what you were trying to achieve.
Well, I came across Will Woon, who's the chief executive of Heart Valve Voice, and we talked about the aims and the things they were trying to do. And obviously, as is often the case with bodies like this, they are doing a lot of really good work with patients and with the professionals themselves, but there's often a difficulty about getting the political connection to the other two parts, and that kind of often holds up the progress. And that was very much Will's assessment of what was happening as regards heart valve. So we decided to set up this group. I mean, it's my experience in politics. People don't always see this. They always think it's the kind of adversarial kind of ding-dong session you see at Prime Minister's Questions. But, I mean, the truth is, far more happens in all party groups than it happens behind the scenes. And one of the lessons I learned very early is that if you want to make a real difference, and particularly I was an opposition MP at the time, if you want to make a real difference, if you want to change something and get a bit of attention to it, you have to find like-minded souls in other parties. So, you know, I set about finding some Conservative MPs and Liberal MPs who would also support what we were trying to do, and together we put together a programme of work to raise awareness of the issue and to focus on trying to bring about some kind of change, particularly in the area of better early diagnosis and stethoscope tests, and in promoting alternate procedures like transcatheter procedures.
Because what was happening around the same time was COVID, and then patients weren't being treated, they weren't going to the hospital, so you had a backlog of heart valve disease patients, and you worked on using TAVI to help reduce those backlogs and work with the government and other politicians and the All Party Parliamentary Group to change that. Tell us more about that.
Well, I mean, one of the things, I don't know if there is sometimes a little bit of inbuilt resistance in the medical profession to new procedures. I'm not sure. You know, I think there may be a tendency we always have done it like this, or we're very familiar with doing things this way. And I mean, I think there's a very persuasive argument for TAVI procedures because they are essentially more likely to have favourable outcomes for the patient. And well, the question of cost is marginal. They may technically be more costly. I think it depends how you evaluate it, because if you take 7 hours in an operating theatre and 3 days in intensive care and 6 months off work, you know, I'm not sure they are more expensive, but there may be, because of the way NHS budgets are allocated and departmental budgets are allocated, they can often look more costly. I think that's I would say that's a better argument. But as a consequence, they're rationed, as is everything in health. And in fact, I think Britain, certainly at that time, had one of the lowest rates of TAVI procedures in Europe. And there was no logical reason for that. I mean, we had as many surgeons trained or potentially capable of being trained to do it, and we had as many centres that could provide it. So, I mean, we had to kind of work to try and raise the profile and persuade ministers that there needed to be more encouragement of this. And as you say, I think, I suppose it is one of the consequences of anything like COVID. For all the horrible things associated with it, it's often a period that does help encourage or usher in change as well, the aftermath of something like that.
So eventually the NHS England changed its guidelines to prefer TAVI to reduce the backlog, which is great. And that chimes with your view on what I think the NHS should be. It's one where innovation should be used to, well, you can tell me yourself, I suppose, to make hospitals more efficient.
Yes, well, I mean, you know, like most people, and I would say actually probably most politicians irrespective of party, I mean, I think the NHS is a wonderful achievement. It does amazing things, and you know, we should be very proud of it. But there is an issue in this country, partly, as I said earlier, about the way some of the budgets are divvied up and handed out, and partly maybe because of the size and structure of the organisation, the length of time it takes to bring about change and to bring new treatments and new procedures on board. You know, we have tests and trials that go on ad nauseum. No one's saying we shouldn't have safety trials, but they go on forever and they never get out of the little area in which the trial is occurring, which means there are all these people in various parts of the country not benefiting from innovation that often originates in this country. So we put all this money into medical R&D and we come up with some great things, and then all over the world people are benefiting from them, and we're still doing a little trial in some part of Leeds or wherever it is. So I mean, I guess you know, my view is that for the NHS to advance at the current time, yes, it needs more money and more predictable resources, and it does need more staff in some areas where it's clearly short. But it also has to work on both fronts, the whole kind of early diagnosis, better public health, better prevention, so that we have less people in acute hospital situations. We need to put much more emphasis on that, and where people are being treated, we need to utilise the most efficient and effective treatment methods and those that are going to be least threatening for them. And my sense is that's a kind of change where we could make a lot more progress.
And the patient voice is very important. And how much do you think it helped that when you were talking with other politicians, talking with government, talking with ministers, that you had that lived patient experience?
Yes, I think it certainly did help me. It helped me in two ways. My personal experience certainly helped me in the fact that I'd met a lot of other people by that time who had also had similar experiences, meant that I think I felt much more confident in what I was arguing for and what I was saying. And I probably carried a bit more authority in terms of the points I was making. So, you know, I would never say that politicians always have to have a personal experience in order to advocate for something or promote it. But in an area like that, where there's so much of a personal impact for people, I think the personal experience does add to what you can bring.
And personally, you're looking fit and healthy, you're active. How's your heart now, and how do you see that going forward?
Well, the last time I had a checkup, I was told it was in very good condition, and they obviously did a very good job, and I'm delighted about that. So, as far as I know, I'm fit and well. I have been told it is possible. I had a mitral valve repair, and it is possible over the years that it can deteriorate again. So, I mean, you know, I have to be alive to that possibility. I hope if that were the case, I would recognise the symptoms better, but obviously I would also be I'm much more likely to have regular stethoscope tests, so it probably would be diagnosed. And I guess now, because of the advances that have been made with the transcatheter procedures, I could probably have a mitral valve clip, which would mean that, you know, I might be the chap in the operating theatre for 45 minutes and then back to work in 3 weeks or whatever.
That would be great, wouldn't it? But hopefully you don't need it. But so looking ahead, you're now in the House of Lords. What other health areas are you going to be campaigning for, advocating for while you're there? What are key important things you think in the next few years for you?
Well, I actually do want to spend quite a lot of time supporting the heart valve voice movement, because I think, you know, heart valve disease is a killer of people, and it's a very debilitating disease for a lot of people in their late 70s, and that it needn't be like that. So I want to continue to do that. I had in my former constituency, I had both an adult and a children's hospice, and I think the hospice movement, well, I think they do a fantastic job, and I don't think people are always aware of the range of services they provide, how much outreach work they do, how much support they are for parents. And of course, children who have a life-limiting illness can live into adulthood these days. So, you know, it's not quite the image that's sometimes portrayed. So, but hospices largely rely on fundraising and charitable donations. Now, I'm not against that, and I don't necessarily think they have to be intrinsically linked to the NHS, although I would like to see more predictable and better funding to support them. But I think that's something I'd like to do some stuff on. And then, as I was talking earlier, I think we are making great advances in drugs and treatments all the time, but this time lag in bringing them to the forefront and using them for people who would benefit now is far too long. And, you know, if there is supposed to be a benefit of Brexit, we're supposed to be free to set our own regulatory controls. And, you know, there are some areas where we should actually move things along. You know, the West Midlands has got the most diverse, youngest and stable population in the entire country. It's the perfect place to be bringing new medicines on board, and we should be using, you know, the things that are going on at the Life Sciences Park and the Institute for Translational Medicine to make sure that people are benefiting now.
And you've become a trustee of Heart Valve Voice, and I'm sure they're very grateful for that. What advice are you going to be giving to them? To what should they be focusing on in the coming years?
Well, at this moment, I think the key thing is to make sure that people get more regular testing. I don't personally believe that we can leave that to asking people to go to their GP, so we've got to look at other options, perhaps workplace facilities, which in a sense is what I had, perhaps using high street pharmacies, maybe mobile units. I think I'm reluctant to say we've got to have an absolute screening programme, because I think there may be some issues around the management of that. But I think we've got to try to encourage better early diagnosis, and that means more testing for people. So I think that would be my first one. In terms of new techniques or technologies, we should certainly be pushing the digital stethoscope, which almost anyone could use. So that makes it even easier to test people. It would seem to me that's the next one. And I want to see this country at the top of the Transcatheter Procedure League, not languishing near the bottom. So I think if we could work on all three of those fronts, we might make a huge difference.
It would certainly make a huge difference. And then, final question for you, if you were giving advice from your experience to someone your age, similar patient who's going through the same process, been diagnosed, what advice would you give to any other patient?
Well, I would go and make sure that I had a test immediately. I wouldn't think it was something I should ignore. I think that's the first thing. I think you've got to get tested. I think maybe with the benefit of hindsight, I would suggest looking around for a support group, both pre any, whatever kind of procedure or operation you have. I think maybe I'd look around for a support group, both before and afterwards, and I think that can be very beneficial for the individual, maybe for members of the family as well, depending on the circumstances. So I think that, and I suppose finally, I would actually say, look, just take the advice and do what they're telling you, because it's probably the best option.
Thank you, Steve, very much. It's been a pleasure to hear your stories. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
So thank you. That brings us to the end of another edition of the Pioneering Patient podcast. Please watch, and please, if you've got any ideas for future guests or ideas, please send them to me at the email. Give a subscribe if you want to see future editions, and likes if you can. And otherwise, please remember to take good care of your health.